Hello folks, Marco Landry here, and today is the day. So for those of you who have been following me, I've been having this messy harness on my new R3 here for a long time. I'm hopeful that today I'm going to be able to complete the process of removing all of the ABS components from this bike. So long story short is that my second bike, or my other bike, is also an R3 and it doesn't have ABS on it. So I've upgraded the braking system on this bike to have the Brembo components in front. So I have the RCS 15 and the Brembo P4 caliper. Also upgraded the disc in front and back. I also upgraded the brake lines, and I'm no longer leveraging the hydraulic unit for the ABS. But the hydraulic unit is still there, and I'm having a few issues. So when I keep the ABS unit connected and I turn the bike on, I'm getting a code 42 error on my multi-display, and my ABS and check engine lights are both turned on. So I figured initially that I could simply purchase an ABS ECU delete kit, or ABS delete kit, I should say. I think this is the right term here. So this is an ABS delete kit from FlashTune ECU. So the idea or the purpose behind this is that if you disconnect the hydraulic unit, or if you disconnect the ECU wire that goes to your ABS, you have this loom here, and this is again for the ABS ECU, and you connect this little FlashTune ECU here. What should happen in theory is that it should remove some of the error codes, and it should allow you to have a clean display with no errors on it. In my case, now that I have this on, if I turn the bike on, I'm still getting a code 42 error, which I got before. My check engine light is no longer on, or my ABS light is no longer on, but the check engine light is on now. And on top of this, what I'm having now is that when I spin the wheel, I don't have a speed display. So it's not displaying the speed and it's not increasing the mileage. So I figured that that was not exactly what I was looking for. I'm kind of paranoid that way. I just like I like everything to be clean and no errors, and I want to be warned if something goes wrong with the bike. So my alternative now is that I'm gonna replace all this wiring unit, or this wiring harness, and I will install a non-ABS wiring harness. And in the process, I'm also gonna upgrade or change my ECU to the aRacer Mini RCX, or the RCX Mini ECU that's been flashed and set up already by Norton Motorsports. So that ECU will allow me to have the optimal fuel map and will get rid of the OEM ECU. And while I'm doing all of this, obviously, because I will add the new wiring loom or wiring harness, I'll be able to remove that hydraulic unit, which will reduce the weight of the bike. And I will also have a functional speedometer, because I also purchased a module that will allow me to tap into the crankcase to get the speed. And I know that the speed reading is not as accurate if you're doing this, but in my case, I'm also using an aftermarket multi-display, and in this case, I'm using the HM dash. And if I run quickly here in the back of my garage, this HM dash unit allows me to program or input the size of my sprocket, the size of the tire, and will do the correction for the speed. So that's why I'm not too concerned about reading the speed from the crankcase, because I'm going to be able to offset the variation with this multi-display. And finally, what I'm going to be able to do as well is remove the ring from the back, or the ABS ring from the back, and I'll be able to swap the wheels from bike to bike with no issues, because I will no longer need that ABS ring to read the speed. So that's the process. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the gas tank, and after that I already have my new harness, and my new harness has been well, my bench is too busy. There's too much stuff, but I'll show you the harness in a few minutes. And this harness is the non-ABS harness, as I mentioned earlier, and I've removed all the extra connectors and wires that are no longer needed for track bike. So that means that I remove the connector for the fan, I remove all the wires and the connectors for the lights, and I also have a keyless option on this one as well, on this bike. So all of the non-needed wires, connectors, fuses, switches, everything has been removed on that new harness. So I'm simply going to start disconnecting from the back and reconnect everything. I'll also install that new speed sensor on the crankcase, and I'll cross my fingers and we'll start the bike and see if it works after that. If everything works well, obviously I'm also going to remove the hydraulic unit, and then I should be okay to move forward. Okay, so what I want to talk about now before I get started is my wiring harness. So as I mentioned earlier, I've already cleaned up this harness. It's already optimized, and it doesn't have any of the extra wires that are not needed. And on top of this, what I will install on the crankcase as well is this little module here that will allow me to capture the speed from the transmission or the crankcase. So I will need to install this, and I'll list the part number in the description below, but you will need this little part here. And in case you won't see it now, this is the part number here. And on top of this, you will also need a retaining clip like this that will hold this part in place. This is the part number for this one. And you also need a bolt, and this is the part number and the bolt that is needed to hold everything in place. So that will be connected on the crankcase, but everything else will be simply a matter of plug and play. So you can see here that I've labeled everything properly. So I have all my labels on all these wires. There's a few things that I did here. You can see I have a little sticker here. This is for the clutch bypass. This is for the kickstand bypass. And I'm going to test everything first. And once everything has been tested, I will retape and add the little rubber protector like this at all the key locations. But for now, just for testing purposes, I just want to make sure that everything fits properly. I can connect everything properly. The bike's going to start. I will get a reading. I won't get any errors. And after that, I'll retape the harness. I also posted a video a while back on how to clean the wiring harness. I did it on the bike as opposed to taking it apart. But you can also look at that video. It will be linked above here, and it will explain the full process of cleaning the wiring harness for your track bike or your Yamaha R3 track bike. All right, now we are doing the actual work. In order to disconnect all these connectors, what I like to have normally is these small flat blade screwdrivers. So you can see here, tiny little flat blade screwdriver. Sometimes it allows you to unlatch the connectors properly. So super helpful to have. The other tool that you can use as well is a solid needle as well. If it's not too big, you can just insert it and it unlatches that little latch. So another thing I wanted to mention here is that the ABS ring that I was mentioning earlier is that small ring inside the wheel here. So if we look at this here, this is the ABS ring here, and this is the speed sensor that will read the speed from the rotation, or the speed of the rotation of this this little ring. So in order to get rid of all your ABS system, you can now remove that ring, or there's like 3 or 4 of these little bolts that will hold that ring in place, so you can safely remove this if you do that conversion. And you can also remove this bolt here, and I don't have the right size here, so that should be an 8mm, and then you can get rid of this wire that goes to your ECU. So all of this can be discarded after that. So if I simply take my 8mm wrench now, I can simply undo this bolt here, and once it's undone, we can simply remove that little sensor, and this is your speed or ABS sensor. So again, this will no longer be required. So I've showed you how to remove the sensor from the back. There's also one of these sensors in the front. Obviously this is controlling your ABS system. So mine was already removed from the front, and I also removed the ring because I was only hoping to use the speed sensor functionality from that rear cable. So if you're not familiar with this, the R3 with the ABS system will pull their speed from that little sensor in the back. The front is only for braking purposes. It's not gonna impact your speed though. So the same type of connector will be available in the front. It actually looks like this. You'll see same concept. You have this little connector here, or this little hole that will connect to your front caliper. Same thing for the back caliper. But again, these are no longer needed if you do the conversion to non-ABS. I wanted to mention a few things here. So this positive wire here is going to the ECU for the ABS, so we will no longer need to use that connector. So I'll probably just remove this little piggy tail here from this assembly. So you can disconnect this, and same thing for the fuse here for the ABS that are normally here in the corner. That will no longer be needed as well, so we won't have this with the new harness. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is that in order to push this out here, so the ECU connector, in order to push it out and put a new one in, and same thing for the fuse box here, because they're quite big, you will need to remove these 2 bolts here and the 2 bolts on the side here. So you can see here, this one here, and there's one on the other side right here. So all of these bolts will need to be removed in order to properly route the wiring harness and all the hardware that comes with it. Actually, you could just remove the 2 in the back if you wanted to. I just find it's easier to remove everything, and then it gives you a bit more room to work. So in order to do this work, you will also need to remove the air box. And to remove the air box, there's 2 10mm bolts on both sides that need to be removed. There are also some hoses that are connected to the air box that need to be disconnected. And finally, there's also 2 clips that are connecting the air box to the throttle body. So you'll need to loosen up those 2 clips in order to move the air box out, or pull it back and lift it up after that. So this is the process to remove the air box, and then you'll have clear access to the remaining wires in this area of the bike. I would also strongly recommend that you put some paper towel or some rags in your throttle bodies here to make sure that there's no junk or no debris or no little wires that will go into these two openings here. So not the best angle here, guys, but this is the ABS hydraulic unit, and it's retained in place by these two bolts here. So these bolts are 8 millimeters. So I got my wrench here in a socket, and I'm simply gonna undo these two bolts, and we should be able to get rid of this hydraulic unit after that. So here's the first bolt out and the second bolt, and let's see how that's gonna be removed after that. So that's moving here. I think there might be another bolt here. Oh yeah, there's another bolt. That's right here in the back here. It's right below this bolt here, and it goes in on this side there. So let's see if we can remove this one as well, if that's going to do the trick or not. Hopefully that's it. Let's see if we can wiggle this out, and here we go. So not sure how easy that's going to be to remove. It's going to be like a bit of a Tetris puzzle here. That's definitely not what I had in mind here, so I think I'm going to have to take a different approach. Alright, so I guess now my next option is to remove these connectors for the brake lines here, and I believe that's going to be a 12 mil. Yep, so 12 millimeter, and I'll undo these two banjo bolts at the top here. And of course they are super tight. I don't want to scratch the bodywork or the frame here, so what I'm going to do is just put a rag so that when I'm torquing these bolts, it's not going to scratch the paint on the swing arm. Alright, we got one here, and let's see if we can do the second one as well, like this. So this is the first banjo bolt here. There's still a bit of brake fluid in there, so I'll be extra careful not to have any brake fluid on the paint. And yeah, I just want to reiterate again that this brake fluid is very nasty for your paint, so be extra careful if you're doing the same thing as I'm doing now. Now I'm struggling to remove this unit, this hydraulic unit. So there's a bracket right here that is holding these hoses in place. So what I'm going to try to do is to undo this bolt here. I have to move this slightly over here. So if I can undo this bolt, it might give me a bit more room to remove the hydraulic unit. So let's see if we can make this work here. This is an 8 millimeter socket, by the way. Alright, so now this is off, or it's disassembled, I should say. And what I'm going to do now is try to remove these two remove these two hoses here. Simply pull this away. Maybe I'll push it towards the back instead, might be a bit easier. Here we go. So this is part one here. And the second part will be the hydraulic unit. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I'll be able to pull it out or not, because it's quite big. And I'm not sure if there's enough room here to wedge this in between. I'm going to try to remove a bit of brake fluid first so it doesn't drip anywhere. There we go. So now looks like I can pull it from the other side here. Let's see if that's the case or not. Here we go. So this is the ABS unit here, and this is where the ECU plugs in. And now obviously this is no longer needed, so this is quite heavy, so that's definitely going to reduce the weight of the bike as well. So before I continue with the removal of the cables, I'm going to install the speed sensor now. So the speed sensor, I have an extra camera here, so hopefully you're going to be able to see this properly. But the speed sensor will be installed right here where I'm pointing my screwdriver. So if I move all of these cables away here, and that little hose here, so this is a 5mm internal X, and I am assuming that the best way of removing this bolt without removing anything else will be to use a small stubby wrench that is adjustable and a fairly lengthy 5mm bit. So I'm going to try to push this in there and just get that socket, that internal X socket, into the head of the bolt, and make sure that is fully inserted so I don't strip anything. And now, if the mechanic gods are on my side, I should be able to do this fairly easily. Before doing so, I just want to make sure that my wrench is set up to unscrew something as opposed to tightening something here. So let's do this again. I'm going to make sure that it's fully inserted in that head, and I'm going to try to undo it here. Here we go. It's only 10 Newton meter, so it should not be very, very tight in there. And one thing that I'm going to do before I unscrew this any further is that I'm going to spray a bit of air in here to make sure that there's no dust or anything that will go inside there. Right. So now I'm gonna finish removing that bolt from there. And I know it's difficult to see, I apologize for that, but I have very little room here to try to capture this on camera. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure that nothing is loose around this, so that nothing falls into that that opening once you remove the bolt and the cap. And this bolt is located right behind the breather cap of the crankcase, and there's a little plate there that's pretty solid in there. You will need to remove this, and I have to figure out a way to wiggle this here out of there. So we'll Let's see if a small screwdriver might be able to pry this out here. Maybe I'll try a bigger screwdriver. Here we go. So now I'm able to slide it from side to side, and I should be able to lift it up after that. Well, I guess I'll need to keep moving from side to side a bit longer here and see if I can grab it with my fingers and lift it up. I'm just going to try a wrench here, see if I can lift it up. Now it's been sideways. Yeah, still stuck in there. So maybe I'm going to try some pliers and see if I can lift this up. I've got these long needle pliers that might do the trick here. Let's see if that's going to work. Here we go. So this is what it looks like here. It was in there pretty solid. After removing that cap, we are now ready to install that speed sensor. And the way it's working is that you have the speed sensor that I talked about earlier, and you have that little ring as well. So this is the ring that will go underneath, and you will line up the hole for the bolt here, and you will put it on top of your ring, and then you will insert this into that hole in your crankcase where you remove that plug from earlier, or that cap. And you have to make sure that everything is lined up properly, and once it's lined up, you just press that speed sensor in place, and you'll feel it clipping in, and then you have to try to center that little metal bracket underneath, and then you'll simply take your bolt and you'll put the bolt in, and we will screw it in place, and we will line this up in that hole and see if we can screw this in place. Wow, first try. Look at that. That never happens. So now what I'm going to do with my fingers, I'm going to line up that little metal spacer underneath, make sure that it's centered, and make sure that the sensor is properly seated. And I know this is obvious, but when you are installing it, the face of the connector will be towards you. I'm just trying to screw it as much as I can with my fingers and making sure that everything is properly lined up. So that's why I'm taking my time here, and this little metal bracket underneath keeps moving, so I want to make sure that it's properly centered. So I'm going to take my 5mm internal X here and see if I can screw this a bit more. It's a bit easier with that, actually. Should have done this first. And you can feel that metal ring underneath, and like with your finger, when you're pinching it, you can see if it's lined up properly on the little boss, or the little thing that's sticking out of the crankcase there. So I'm just trying to make sure that it's properly lined up, and I'm gonna finish with my wrench here. And the torque for this is 10 Newton meters, so it doesn't have to be super tight. I think that should be good enough here. And that double check with my fingers one more time. Make sure everything is solid, and it is. So that's it for the speed sensor. So hopefully once we connect everything back, I'll get a reading and I'll be able to get some reporting on my dashboard and see the speed of the bike. So fingers crossed, we'll see in a few minutes. So now I'm going to keep disconnecting all of these other wires here. There's a bunch of them that needs to be disconnected. So I'm going to keep doing this, and then after that we'll start the assembly process. Well, I just had a bit of a surprise here, and I had spent the last 2 hours looking for an answer. It turns out that on the ABS unit, you have a relay for the fuel pump. And normally when I disconnect something, I go and look at my other harness to make sure I modified it properly. And I couldn't find a fuel pump relay on the non-ABS version for the wiring harness, obviously. So I said, oh, maybe I just removed the wrong relay when I was doing my modification for the wiring harness for the non-ABS one. And I had to pull the diagrams out, and I looked at it and I looked at it again, and then, like I said, maybe I don't have the right version. I even downloaded the new shop manual to make sure that I was looking at the right information. So I compared the shop manual for the ABS and non-ABS version. I looked and re-looked and looked again at the freaking harness here, and there is no fuel pump relay on the non-ABS version. I even looked at all the cables that I cut from the new harness to make sure there was no additional connector for a relay. And it turns out that I did the right thing. So very, very important, because if you're like me and you're trying to map a one-for-one connection, obviously you're going to have a big challenge if you do so. So FYI, no fuel pump relay on the non-ABS version of the wiring harness. So you don't have to scratch your head forever. Just totally forget about it, and we'll reassemble without that relay and see if everything works okay. So I'm going to disconnect all of these components now. I'm going to start on the far right by disconnecting the throttle body assembly, or the throttle body sensor assembly, I should say. And then the two fuel injectors here at the top, and then we'll also disconnect the ISC, or the idle speed control unit. So to disconnect these, it's simply a matter of pressing the little tab and pulling straight out. Same thing here as well. Let's connect this one first. And all right. To disconnect the ignition coils, you can take an 8mm wrench, undo the bolt on both sides here, and once it's undone, you can simply lift your ignition coil. There's two rubber grommets that are keeping it in place, and then you'll have easy access to the terminals in front. So I'm just going to put that bolt back here. So my ignition coil is here, and there's two, I think they're called spade terminals here. You can simply just squeeze them and pull them out here. There's a little protective boot on top, which makes it a bit more challenging here. If these little terminals are too stubborn and you can't get them out, what you can do, simply take a pair of pliers, and it gives you better grip to pull them out. All right. Alright, so these two are disconnected, and I'm just going to take a mental note of the colors here. So on the right hand side I have the orange wire, and in the middle I got the I believe the two red ones, so orange and red. And on the other side here, if I just move over, pull this one, and this one will be again the red wire, I believe, and the one on the far right will be the gray wire. So hopefully I'm gonna have the same colors on the other one here, and I'm gonna leave this here for now. My speedometer or my multi-display has already been disconnected, so now I can simply pull that wire from the front here, and you'll see that this is the multi-display wire right here. So here you got the all the wires for the ignition coils, and I've already disconnected the wires for the keyless Woodcraft switch here, so that was disconnected. So now nothing is connected. We are free to pull everything apart. And it's simply a matter of being very careful in pulling everything off the bike here. And I'm being extra careful just in case I need to reuse these wires if I have any issues with what I'm attempting to do here. So this is it here, guys. So this is the full wiring harness here, and we are now ready to install the new one. All right, folks, so the harness is off the old bike. I've cleaned up as much as possible. There was a lot of dirt in there, so clean up the engine bay or the engine area as much as I could. And now I'm ready to reassemble my new harness, my new modified harness. And overall it looks pretty good. So this is what I have here. So the same connectors as before. One of the main difference in addition to the relay is the fact that the plug here for the ground on that non-ABS relay is a very small connector versus the one that is here on the bike, which is a bigger one. So that's not gonna fit properly. So I'm gonna have to find a connector. I was hopeful that I would be able to use one of these DT connector here. The gauge for this is too small. I'm not able to connect it on that wire. So I'm gonna have to try to find a Molex connector or a different type of connector that will support this application. Worst case scenario, I'm just gonna crimp the two wires together or solder them together. There's an extra ground wire here that's not gonna be needed. As you can see here, it's not even going anywhere. That was for the lights, if I'm not mistaken, or the fan maybe. So that's no longer on the bike, but I'm still going to keep it there just in case I need to ground something else. So maybe my quick shifter will be grounded on this extra wire if I choose to do so. And the rest of the harness, as you can tell, has been taped now to certain areas so I can easily route the different looms. I'm going to start installing it, and we'll start from the back of the bike going towards the front. Okay, so now I've routed the main harness, and I just need to do some reassembly. So I'll reattach that cover, that underneath cover here in the back of the bike. And once this is done, I'll start attaching the wires at the right location. Actually, I'm not going to attach them right now. I'm just going to do a bit more testing, make sure that everything can be connected properly. After that, I'll put the tank temporarily. I'll crank the bike, make sure that my harness is properly modified. And then if everything is working, I'll take the harness back again and remove it and tape it properly and put all the rubber protection or these little casing around the wires to make sure that there's some extra protection from the bending around the frame, and also to make sure that it's extra protection against abrasion on the side of the bike, or to make sure that when I pinch it or I secure it or I attach it with a zip tie, that's going to prevent the rubbing and potentially damaging the wires. So that's why this is very critical, very important. So I rearranged the harness. I've decided I was going to tape it right away. So yes, I'm living on the edge. Everything's been taped, everything has been protected with these little rubbers here, or these little covers, or whatever you call them. I've wrapped everything properly, so everything is properly routed. The only outstanding thing was to install that relay, and this is just unclip from the rear one. You have two little tabs on both sides, so you put your screwdriver and you pull these little tabs out. Oh, I just broke it here. So you pull these little tabs out, and then you clip it back on. And there's also in that relay, there's also a little rubber clip here. So you'll slide this inside of there's a groove by the rectifier in the back. So you just slide this in, so it holds that relay in place. And if you're wondering, both relays that are on the other harness are the same model, so you can take whichever one you want to reuse or use for the specific harness, or the non-ABS harness. Right. So the airbox is now back on. I've also connected the new RC Mini X aRacer ECU, so that's been plugged in, it's in place now. This is what it looks like. My battery bay is also ready to receive the battery, and I'll zip tie it in place with the zip ties here. And you can see it's quite crowded in here, quite busy, right? So there's a lot of stuff, but that's fine. I'm gonna have my raised seat on top of this, and it's gonna protrude up, so all the wires will be underneath. All right, now it's time to reinstall the battery, and I'm just gonna have a temporary installation because I still need to install my quick shifter after that. So I'm not gonna tie wrap anything in place just yet. I'll do this a bit later. So we're gonna start with positive here, connect this in place, and then we'll do the negative. And then I'll plug in my speedo as well. Probably should have done the speedo first, but not a big deal if it's just done after the fact. So that's first terminal here, and then we'll do the positive as well. The wiring stuff here is like so busy, so crowded. So we'll just have to be careful when we put everything back in place with the seat and the bodywork. But for now, well, actually I probably should have done this on the rear side here. That's gonna be sticking out too high. We're gonna do it this way here. All right, so I got my ECU, the battery, fuse box is there, the relay is there as well, and I guess everything else is okay now. So I think I'm just gonna plug in my speedometer or my multi-display, and then we will give this a try. I'm ready to start testing everything. Everything's been connected. Speedo is connected. There's nothing tangling here. All the wires are clean. There's nothing being pinched by the fuel tank either. In the back, it's a bit messy, as I mentioned earlier, but everything looks good. The terminals on the battery are attached. The ECU is plugged, and I think we're good to do a test. Well, folks, it's been 2 weeks since I've been on camera because I had to do some Very, very, very complex troubleshooting. At least for me, it was very complex. And it turns out that when I clean up my wiring harness initially, I made a bit of a mistake. So if you look at the wiring diagram for the right handlebar switch, there is a red and white wire that connects to the radiator fan motor relay, which is number 77 here. And there's an extra red and white wire that goes and connect to 4 different items, including the meter assembly, the ignition fuse, starter relay, and the diode number 2. And I guess I was a bit of an idiot, and I cut that wire and never reconnected any of the other 4 devices. So that was my first issue. So I had to untape everything and figure out that I was missing that connection between the handlebar switch and those 4 items. So once that was resolved, the bike was cranking, but the Wi-Fi for the ECU was not working, and I couldn't get the fuel pump to prime as well. So I was at the racetrack this weekend, and it turns out that when I was doing all this troubleshooting, I removed the backup fuse from the fuse box. And I guess in my wisdom, I thought that the backup fuse was equivalent to the spare fuses, and I could simply remove it and have less hardware to look at and troubleshoot. And when I did this, I also did the same thing on my other R3 that is running perfectly fine, and I was swapping parts between the 2 bikes to try to figure out if maybe the fuel pump was not working properly, or if I had some air somewhere. So long story short, I removed that backup fuse from this bike. I also removed it from my other bike, and then I went to the racetrack with my other bike without that backup fuse being in, and my idle was always at 4,000 RPM and higher. So it turns out that if you remove that freaking fuse, your bike will idle very high, and also if you have the aRacer ECU, you won't get any priming of the fuel pump. So long story short is that I had to do a lot of troubleshooting. Now everything is working properly. So when I turn the switch on, you can hear the bike priming right now, and it's going to crank properly and it's going to start properly. So I did all the testing, and the display unit, or the dashboard, if you will, is displaying all the right information. The speed is working, the gear indicator is working. I have no alarm or no error code, so that's all good. So I had to untape my harness, and I just retaped it very quickly. I'm going to finish retaping it very shortly, and I've probably covered this in another video in the past, but I'm using the Tesa tape. So this is the Tesa 51036 tape. This tape is amazing. I use this for all my wiring harness right now, and the nice thing about it is that you can untape it and your wires don't get too sticky. It's easy to untape, and it's super reliable. This is the material, or this is the tape that's being used, I believe, in the Mercedes and the BMW wiring harness. So super reliable. I really like this. I had to order a bunch more of these rolls to do the full harness. And yeah, I mean, now everything's working, so I'm gonna keep moving on with the project. Not exactly the video that I was hoping to make. I mean, it's been very disjuncted. I've had like multiple pieces of videos that I'm going to stitch together, so hopefully the results will be okay, and it will be informative to some of you who are hoping to do the same thing. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please, as usual, connect with me. And if that video was helpful, please smash that like button. And if you follow me on a regular basis, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel. And I guess that's it for now. Now I'm going for a beer. So until next time, stay safe, ride safe, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.